You ever notice how your mind drifts to the same scene over and over? Maybe it's a version of your life where you're living somewhere else, doing something completely different. Or a conversation that never happened but plays out perfectly in your head, and then you snap back to reality and feel kind of guilty about it, like you just wasted time, like you should have been more present. Most people treat daydreaming like a bad habit, something to fix. But what if I told you that those recurring mental escapes aren't distractions at all? They're actually your psyche's way of communicating something really important. And once you understand what they're trying to tell you, they stop feeling like avoidance and start feeling like information. I spend a lot of time thinking about how the mind works, particularly the parts we don't consciously control. The nervous system, the subconscious, the patterns we fall into without realizing it. And one of the most misunderstood aspects of our inner world is fantasy. Not the kind you plan or the goals you write down, but the kind that just shows up when you're in the shower, or driving, or staring at your computer screen pretending to work. Understanding what your daydreams are actually doing can completely change how you relate to yourself. It reduces the self-judgment, the confusion about why you feel stuck, and it gives you a clearer sense of what you actually need. Not what you think you should need, what you actually need. So let's talk about what's really happening when your mind wanders. First thing you need to know, daydreaming is not a malfunction. Your brain is not broken because it doesn't stay locked on the present moment 24/7. In fact, your brain has an entire network dedicated to this. It's called the default mode network, and it activates when you're not focused on a specific external task. This is the part of your brain that reflects, makes meaning, processes, experiences, and simulates possible futures. It's not lazy. It's not avoidant. It's actually doing something incredibly sophisticated. It's integrating your life. When you daydream, your brain is running scenarios. It's testing possibilities. It's working through emotions you haven't fully processed. It's rehearsing conversations, outcomes, identities. And here's the key. It's not doing this randomly. The themes that show up repeatedly are clues. They're breadcrumbs your subconscious is leaving for you. Most people don't realize that the content of your daydreams reveals what your psyche is trying to work out. If you keep imagining a life where you're more independent, your mind is processing a need for autonomy. If you keep replaying a version of yourself that's more confident or more creative, your psyche is signaling that some part of your current identity feels constrained. Your daydreams are not a distraction from your real life. They're a commentary on it. Now, here's where people get confused. There is a difference between daydreaming as a healthy psychological process and dissociation as a chronic escape mechanism, and it's important to know which one you're experiencing. Healthy daydreaming leaves you feeling curious, maybe even energized. You come back to the present moment with a little more clarity. Even if you can't quite put it into words yet, it feels generative, like your mind is stretching. Dissociative escape feels different. It feels compulsive. You're not just drifting, you're fleeing. And when you come back, you feel more disconnected, more numb, sometimes more anxious. It's less about exploring possibilities and more about avoiding pain. Both are valid responses to stress, but they're doing different things. And the key to working with your daydreams is learning to recognize the difference. If your fantasies feel like a brief respite that helps you process something, that's your psyche doing its job. If they feel like the only place you can breathe, that's your nervous system telling you something about your current reality that needs attention. Let's get specific, because once you start paying attention to the recurring themes in your daydreams, patterns emerge, and those patterns are not random. If you keep imagining yourself living somewhere else, your mind might be processing a need for environmental change, a different pace of life, or a desire for a fresh start. It's not necessarily telling you to move. It's telling you something about your current environment feels misaligned. If you keep replaying conversations where you finally say what you really think, your psyche is working on assertiveness, boundaries, or unresolved conflict. You're rehearsing a version of yourself that feels more authentic. If you keep imagining a version of your life where you're doing different work, your mind is exploring identity, purpose, or creative expression. It's testing out what it would feel like to be seen differently, to contribute differently. If your daydreams center around being rescued, supported, or understood by someone else, your nervous system might be signaling that you're carrying too much alone, that you need co-regulation, connection, or permission to rest. And here's what most people miss. These aren't wishes, they're diagnostic tools. Your daydreams are showing you where the gap is between who you are and who you're capable of becoming, between what your life looks like and what your nervous system actually needs to feel safe and regulated. Your brain is constantly running simulations. It's one of the most important things it does. Before you ever take action in the real world, your mind rehearses. It imagines outcomes. It plays with variables. This is how humans have always prepared for uncertainty. Daydreaming is your mind's sandbox. It's where you get to try on different identities, test different choices, explore different emotional landscapes without any real-world consequences. And this process is crucial because it helps you clarify what you actually want versus what you think you're supposed to want. Most people don't realize that a lot of what we think we want is just conditioning. It's what we absorbed from family, culture, social expectations. But your daydreams, those come from a deeper place. They come from the part of you that knows what actually feels right, even if it doesn't make logical sense yet. When you pay attention to what your mind gravitates toward when it's free to wander, you start to notice the difference between inherited goals and authentic desires. And that distinction changes everything. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. A lot of recurring daydreams are directly connected to unmet needs, not surface level wants, deep foundational needs. The need to be seen, the need for autonomy, the need for safety, the need for creative expression, the need for rest, the need for challenge, the need for connection. And when those needs aren't being met in your actual life, your psyche doesn't just shut up about it. It starts generating fantasies where those needs are fulfilled, not to torture you, not to make you feel worse about your current reality, but to keep the possibility alive, to remind you that this need still exists, even if you've been ignoring it. Your daydreams are your psyche's way of saying, this still matters. Don't forget about this. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They interpret the fantasy as proof that they're ungrateful, or dissatisfied, or broken. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is your internal system is trying to communicate. If you keep imagining a life with more freedom, your nervous system is telling you that you feel constrained. If you keep imagining a version of yourself that's more expressive, your psyche is telling you that you're suppressing something. If you keep imagining scenarios where you're supported and cared for, your system is telling you that you're depleted. The daydream isn't the problem. The unmet need is the information. If this is something you're actively struggling with, feeling like you've tried all the conscious methods, the affirmations, the goal setting, but you're still stuck in the same patterns, I made a longer breakdown where I walk through a structured way to work with this instead of fighting it. I'll leave that link below. Most people's first instinct when they catch themselves daydreaming is to shut it down, to feel guilty, to label it as unproductive or self-indulgent. And I get it. We live in a culture that pathologizes anything that isn't output focused. But here's what happens when you judge your daydreams. You train your mind to stop showing you the signal. You essentially tell your psyche, I don't want to hear this. And over time, you lose access to one of the most valuable feedback loops you have. Your inner world becomes quieter, not because the needs went away, but because you stopped listening. And then what happens? The unmet needs start showing up in other ways. Irritability, burnout, restlessness, a vague sense that something's off but you can't quite name it, physical tension, emotional reactivity. Your psyche doesn't stop trying to communicate, it just has to get louder. This is why curiosity is so much more effective than discipline when it comes to your inner world. When you approach your daydreams with curiosity instead of judgment, you create space for the real message to come through. You start asking, what is this trying to tell me? What need is this pointing to? What part of my life feels misaligned? And those questions open up possibilities that self-criticism never could. So how do you work with this? How do you turn your daydreams into useful information instead of just background noise or guilt? First, you stop treating them like intrusions. When you notice your mind drifting, instead of immediately snapping back to attention, you pause. You get curious. You ask, where did my mind just go? Second, you start tracking the themes, not obsessively, but gently. You notice if the same scenarios keep showing up. If you're always imagining the same kind of freedom, the same kind of conversation, the same kind of environment. Third, you ask what need this might represent. Not what action you should take, just what the need is. Because once you can name the need, you can start exploring ways to meet it in your actual life, even in small ways. If your daydreams are about solitude and space, maybe the need is for more time alone, not a total life overhaul, just more intentional boundaries around your energy. If your daydreams are about creative expression, maybe the need is for a small, low-stakes outlet. Not quitting your job, just making space for something that feels alive. If your daydreams are about being seen and understood, maybe the need is for deeper conversation or a community that reflects your values, or even just permission to be more honest about who you are. The daydream shows you the need. Your conscious mind gets to explore how to meet it. Here's what changes when you start relating to your daydreams this way. They stop feeling like evidence that you're dissatisfied or broken. They start feeling like information, like your internal system is trying to help you course correct before you end up completely burned out or disconnected. You stop seeing them as distractions and start seeing them as data. And this shift matters because when you stop fighting your inner world, you create more internal safety. Your nervous system relaxes. You stop spending so much energy on self-judgment and start redirecting that energy toward actually addressing what needs attention. You become more integrated, more honest with yourself, more able to make decisions that actually align with what you need, not just what you think you should do. And ironically, when you stop treating your daydreams as the enemy, you also stop getting lost in them as much, because once the message is received, the signal doesn't need to be as loud. This isn't just an interesting psychological concept. This changes how you move through your day-to-day life. When you understand that your recurring daydreams are pointing to unmet needs, you stop waiting for some external permission to address those needs. You stop thinking, once I have more time, once I have more money, once I'm in a different situation, then I'll be able to. You start asking, what's one small way I can honor this need right now? And that question is powerful because it moves you out of fantasy and into agency, not in a forcing way, in a curious, exploratory way. Your daydreams become a guide instead of a distraction. They help you notice where you're out of alignment before it becomes a crisis. They help you stay connected to what actually matters to you, even when the noise of daily life tries to drown it out. And over time, you start to trust your inner world more. You stop second-guessing every feeling, every impulse, every moment of drift. You start to see your psyche as an ally, not an obstacle. Your daydreams are not a sign that you're ungrateful for your life. They're not proof that you're broken or avoidant or unfocused. They're your psyche's way of keeping you connected to what's true, to what you need, to who you're becoming. And the more you listen to them with curiosity instead of judgment, the more useful they become. So the next time your mind drifts, don't fight it. Ask it what it's trying to tell you, because the answer might be exactly what you need to hear. If you want more clarity on how to work with your mind instead of against it, subscribe. I make videos that help you understand why you feel the way you do and how to regulate your nervous system in everyday life. And if you found yourself relating to that feeling of being stuck despite trying all the conscious self-help methods, I'll link that longer breakdown below. It's a structured approach to working with the parts of you that logic and willpower can't reach. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.